Welcome to our Read series. This series is designed to encourage you to R. Read the Bible, E. Every day, A. Ask questions, and D. Determine to obey. As pastor of Oregon Trail Baptist Church, it's my goal that this time of reflection on the Bible reading from the previous week will serve as an encouragement to you to read the Bible, but will also open up opportunities to share, discuss, and ask questions about what you've discovered in God's Word, that we may grow together. As we renew our minds by the washing of the Word, we desire to draw closer to God and to each other. Let's take a look, if you don't mind, at, here, Elizabeth, you want to help me out? Since the Bible reading this week overlaps with the Sunday school lesson I've had prepared since the first week of January, let's go ahead and try to get into this lesson a bit. And it might go a little quicker. And since I've already set up here, I'm just going to put it on the screen so you can see and follow along as you want. We are dealing with the life of Moses here. By way of a little bit review, where chapters 26 to 36 really are kind of this period in the life of Moses and in the book of Numbers where they're preparing to enter into the promised land. They're gearing up the next generation to enter in, and they're cleaning house, they're getting things in order. So Numbers 33 has a review of the journey, reminding them of how good God has been and His provision, in hopes that they will remember that and go in resting in faith. Numbers 34 talks about the dividing up of the land, and we spent a week on that a long time ago. Numbers 35 is what we'll be tackling today, and that's kind of dealing with the special cities that are set aside within the land, and they have a special purpose. So as kind of one person has put it with the bottom graphic there, God is pledging that He will give His people, in 33, victory over the enemies. 34, they're getting a huge land. In 35, they are, which is the chapter we're doing, they're made holy or special or unique or set apart by the fact that they have the Levites spread throughout their land and God Himself dwelling in the land. And in Numbers 26, we'll get to the promise that they will hold this land forever. Page 2 of the handout. All right, Numbers 35, 1 and 2. So we read that each tribe was given cities, was to give cities, to the Levites. So we read in verse 1, and the Lord spake unto Moses. If you want to turn in your Bible, that would be great. Numbers 35. If not, a lot of the text is here in the handout. And the Lord spake unto Moses in the plains of Moab by Jordan near Jericho, saying, Command the children of Israel that they give unto the Levites of their inheritance, of their possessions, cities to dwell in. And ye shall give also unto the Levites suburbs for the cities round about them. Why would the Levites be getting special treatment? Okay, they did not get a quote-unquote land inheritance. These cities are the closest thing the Levites will get to land inheritance. So all the tribes should do this and be a part of this. And anyway, verses 4 to 5. So it describes how these cities would provide housing as well as places to take care of their livestock. So in verse 4, And the suburbs of the cities, which ye shall give unto the Levites, shall reach from the wall of the city and outward 1,000 cubits round about. And ye shall measure from without the city on the east side 2,000 cubits, and on the south side 2,000 cubits, and on the west side 2,000 cubits, and on the north side 2,000 cubits. And the city shall be in the midst, and this shall be to them in the suburbs of the city. So a little description of how these cities should work. They're in measurements, and we'll get into that in a minute here. One of the focuses here of these cities is they're to be spread throughout Israel. You don't want them all in the north. You don't want them all in the south. You want them all throughout Israel. Why do we want them all throughout Israel? So, I'm off the top of my head here, but I think somebody said it this way. If you map the Levitical cities, nobody is more than a day's walk from a Levitical city. Nobody within Israel should be more than a day's walk from getting to a place where, remember, the Levites are the people who deal with the things of the tabernacle. They're the ones who deal with the things of the Lord. They're the ones who should know God's law the best, as it were. They should shine bright, as it were. So this scattering was a way, as one writer puts it, the scattered presence of the Levites throughout the land of Israel suggests that the presence and holiness of God will likewise be distributed over the entire land. But the presence of God eludes capture in any fixed structure or place. God is greater than any house in which God's presence dwells. Remember, at this time they don't have a tabernacle or a temple yet. They have a tabernacle. That's at one location. But these cities were a way that people would stay connected with who God is, what He's doing. Now, they still had trips they would make. I think it was 3 times a year to Jerusalem. They would make these various trips to Jerusalem. But these were ways that they could, the Levites could, in a sense, shine or represent God's holiness throughout the nation. So that if you're on the edges of the nation, it's not like you're out in left field, as it were. Does that make a little bit of sense? I'm getting blank looks, which could be. I want to bring up here a verse from Genesis. So this deals with Jacob's, when he's passing away, he has this prophecy, or this thing he says about his sons here. He says, "Cursed be Simeon and Levi's anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel." He's referring to when these knuckleheads went and killed a bunch of Shechemites. But then he goes on to say, "I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." Now it's interesting here with Levi. Who was the tribe who stood up for the Lord in the wake of the golden calf incident? It was Levi. Yeah. And so there's a sense here where this promise of them being scattered, usually being scattered is a bad thing. However, here, Levites being scattered, it becomes a good thing, or a potential good thing. Do you see how God is fulfilling this, but yet kind of twisting it or spinning it to where these are now the people representing Him to the nations? Comments, questions there? Okay. Yeah, so Donna pointed out there, that was, let's see, what was that, verse 4 and 5? Okay. Now we all can do math, and it talks about 1,000 feet this way, and somehow that becomes 2,000, right? So the discussion on this, how exactly were these cities calculated? Because if you take the city as one point, so here's one point, and you go out 1,000 feet each direction, then you'd get that 2,000 cubits, right? Or 1,000, not feet, but yeah. Yeah. Right. But is any city only one point? See, that's where it kind of gets a little tricky. So that's where, yeah. So this is coming, I think, from Milgram's commentary, and I just put his graphic in. To me, that looks more like a lake than a city. But anyway, let's say that's the shape of your city. How do you measure that out? So you go 1,000 from here or there, and a lot of their cities weren't perfectly square because they would build them like around a hill or whatever, so they actually had curves to them. They had square points to them. Well, okay, so in some sense, Dory, this is getting to like city limits and suburbs. Kind of, the wall of the city really became the limit of the city in some sense, but people would live outside of there and only flee to the city when they needed protection, which, And not every city was a walled city. Let me just stop there. We can be incredibly thankful that we live in a country and a nation where you don't have to run to Guernsey every time there's some sort of an attack and get behind a wall. I mean, think about it. That's a fabric of our culture, part of how our founders intended it, but that was not how normal things worked in the ancient world. So this is where speculation on how this works gets a little creative. Milgram suggests how this works was you take the corners of the city. So you'd start here at this corner and you measure out 1,000 feet, and you start at this corner and measure out 1,000 feet, and that gives you this space here. Thus, this shaded area in between, if a city grows or expands, it actually allows for an expansion of how much pasture land they get. Now, that kind of makes some sense, because think about it. Will a city of 1,000 people need the same amount of pasture land as a city of 4,000 people? So if a city all has the exact same pasture land, that there wouldn't be enough food or whatever to sustain them. Others have drawn these cities to where this is how you get your 2,000 cubits. You start measuring here, and you go up 1,000, then here, and the total between here and here is your 2,000. Okay, I don't know. I'm not really convinced by that. Others are just looking at the city as a circle, and they're saying the first 1,000 cubits here is like your suburbs. So you really don't. You might have some houses, you might have some shacks, you might have some things there, but it's beyond that, kind of more in a circle. The second 1,000 is where you have your fields and vineyards. As your pastor, there's two things I don't know. One, I'm not very good with Hebrew. And two, I don't fully understand this ancient context. Okay? I'm assuming. Yes. Well, see, everybody else had their own land. See, okay, I got two things. Going on to three. All right, so hold that, and I'll finish hers. And then, go ahead. So this would be the place for the city people to have their livestock, as it were. Okay? Let me hold on. Okay, in your comment. Okay. So what it is yes, this is so this city here, we'll just call it Guernsey, just for fun. So this city is within Platte County. And Platte County, let's say, belongs to the tribe of Dan. And they own the land in the county, and they've divvied up the land. But as far as... Right, sure. They have cities that belong to them. But this is the Levitical city. So even though we live within the tribe of Dan, this city belongs to us as Levites. Yes, yeah. But with that, the problem you would have is if the Levites only had the land within the city in an agricultural-based society, how would you take care? How would you have any livestock? How would you have any? They would have to be completely run business cities of sorts, market centers. But this is allowing them to cultivate, use, and develop even their own land, because at least a perimeter, however that worked from the city, they've got space to develop that land, and that is their land belonging to them. So that's kind of... Oh, sorry. Let me go here. We're getting lots of comments today. Go ahead. So that's a helpful point. Not everybody in the city necessarily was a Levite. And we know that's going to be the case because of things in the next few pages of the handout. However, I'm not sure if a non-Levite could actually hold land in the city or not. I don't know that we have a clear... Right. So, one of the things that's happened in several countries outside of America is, this happened in Fiji. If you are not a Fijian, you are not allowed to own or purchase land in Fiji. You can lease or rent land, but you cannot own it. Now, Indians, and not Native American Indians, but Indians from India, they have ran a lot of successful businesses all over the islands of Fiji. And they make lots of money, and they're running businesses in there, but they don't own their land. Okay? So we might have a little bit of that type of thing taking place, where someone who's not a Levite might do quite fine running and maybe renting, we don't know for sure, in the city and running a business or commerce or trade shop, whatever. So we just don't know 100% on that. Yep. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So you're only going to get the measure of accuracy that reflects the measure of instrumentation you have to do this, as well as these laws actually become significant because some of the laws later built up by Pharisees with how far you could travel on a Sunday were based off some of these laws. Now, they're not biblical laws that the Pharisees were coming up with, but like you can only go this far on a Sunday, or you can only, or a Sabbath day. That's based on some of this. So I'm over time. So we have covered a plethora of topics today and have some questions for next week. We will dive in and finish this handout out next week, and we'll pick it up with page 5. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll close out here this morning. Lord, we thank you for your word, and although there's points at which we don't understand, even through these Levitical cities, we can see your heart and purpose to care for your tribe of Levi, the tribe that would serve in the tabernacle and later the temple, and your desire for them to be a light to the nations. You cared about the people who were far away from Jerusalem, and you cared for the people in Jerusalem. And ultimately, you wanted your nation to be a light to the nations around them. And this morning, as we've talked about some of the strange laws, and one of the possibilities on the table is some of their practices were simply being a light and a testimony to the nations around them. And being a nation that was different would cause the other nations to look at you and recognize you're a God who cares and provides for his people. Now, Lord, this morning, would you build that same trust in our hearts and lives? Would we rest in your dependence and care for us? And even as you have detailed plans and numberings here of how a city would be measured out and how much pasture they would have, we can rest in the fact that you know all the details of our lives, and you work our lives to good for your purpose and glory. We thank you for this time in your word. We ask that you bless our service to follow. In your Son's name, amen.